Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name's Josh, and today we are chatting about mirrorless cameras versus DSLRs, and if this year should be the year that you make the switch from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera. Now, I completely understand this video is not for all of you. I know there's a lot of my viewers that already are shooting on mirrorless cameras, are already confident and comfortable with those cameras, and so if that's you, no worries, you can go ahead and skip to next week. But I've been getting a lot of questions from photographers who are still shooting with DSLRs and are going, Josh, mirrorless camera technology feels daunting. It feels like this new technology that I'm gonna have to learn a whole new system. It feels overwhelming. And so today, what I wanna do is hopefully take the curtain down and just honestly demystify mirrorless cameras, because they're honestly not that crazy. They're not that intimidating, but I can totally understand when you're moving from a DSLR that you feel confident, you feel comfortable, you've invested time and energy into learning and mastering that specific camera, to jump to what feels like a whole new technology and a whole new evolution of camera technology just feels daunting and feels overwhelming. So today I just want to share my experience. What are some of the things you should expect if you're moving from DSLR to mirrorless? What are the differences? How does that work? Basically, we're just talking all things mirrorless. Let's dive in, let's go. So first off, I just want to talk about the hype around mirrorless cameras. So it's funny because honestly, mirrorless camera technology isn't that new of technology. Now, of course, there's new cameras being released what seems like every day, but mirrorless cameras really have been around since the early 2010s. Sony kind of pioneered mirrorless camera technology and pushed mirrorless cameras into popularity with their Sony Alpha series, and really camera brands like Canon and Nikon have been slowly, very slowly, trying to catch up ever since then. So mirrorless cameras really aren't a new thing, but for someone who's used to shooting on a DSLR, the technology still feels pretty foreign. So let's talk about some of the differences between mirrorless cameras and DSLRs. Now, the primary difference between mirrorless cameras and DSLRs is that mirrorless cameras don't have, you guessed it, a mirror.
Wow.
So logistically speaking, on a DSLR, light comes in through the lens and hits this mechanism of mirrors that basically routes the light from the lens up through the viewfinder prism and out to the optical viewfinder. You're physically seeing the light that's coming in through the lens being routed up through these mirrors and out the viewfinder. This is called an optical viewfinder. On a mirrorless camera, there is no mirror, and so the light literally comes in through the lens and hits the camera sensor. But then how do you actually see what's coming through the lens? The camera sensor routes electronically what it's seen through the lens up to a screen that displays through the viewfinder an electronic version of what the camera sensor is seeing. This is called an electronic viewfinder. This is the major difference between mirrorless cameras and DSLRs, and one of the things that takes the longest time to get used to when you're switching from DSLRs to mirrorless. Now, honestly, this is one of the things I fought the longest when I was switching from a DSLR to a mirrorless. I didn't want this electronic viewfinder. I really liked looking through the optical viewfinder and seeing exactly what the scene looked like, not what the camera was seeing. But the interesting thing is the electronic viewfinder has a massive amount of bonuses over the optical viewfinder. So let's talk about that. So the first major bonus of the electronic viewfinder is that you're literally seeing in your viewfinder what the camera sensor is seeing itself. This means you no longer have to guess where your metering is. You don't have to take test shots. You can literally see through the viewfinder exactly what the photo is going to look like before you ever take it. And because the viewfinder is electronic, it also allows you to display a ton of information about the shot directly within the viewfinder. Now you can monitor white balance, you can watch the histogram, you can see all the readouts of all the camera settings, so everything you need to know about how you're taking your image is literally displayed in the viewfinder for you. Everything's right at your fingertips, and it makes the shooting process really, really easy. And because there's no mirror mechanism in the camera that has to pop out of the way when you take a photo, there's little to no viewfinder blackout, which means the entire time you're looking through the viewfinder, you're seeing exactly what you're shooting, and then every time you click the shutter button, it just takes a photo without actually blacking out the screen. So this is super helpful for sports, for action, and just for keeping your eye as a photographer on the composition rather than losing sight of that every single time you click the shutter. Another massive bonus with mirrorless cameras is that they're often way lighter and way smaller because they don't have to fit that whole mirror mechanism prism thing with the optical viewfinder. All that's been removed from the camera, and so the cameras are often a lot lighter, a lot smaller, which saves so much stress on your back, so much weight in your camera bag. To have camera technology at your fingertips is a lot easier and a lot easier to carry. And if all of that didn't convince you yet, let's talk about the focusing capabilities of mirrorless cameras, because the focusing capabilities of mirrorless cameras versus DSLRs is what really sets mirrorless cameras apart. So prior to shooting on the Canon R3 and the R6, I was shooting on the Canon 5D Mark IV. If you've shot on the 5D Mark IV before, it's a pretty popular DSLR. That camera has 61 different focus points that you can use to select your focus in a shot. Those focus points are arranged with a little grid in the middle of the frame, and so basically you can position that focus point in a specific spot, but it has to be within that specific grid that you can see through the viewfinder. You can't go edge to edge. On a mirrorless camera, like for instance the new Canon R6 Mark II, there are literally, get this, 4,897 focus points that go effectively edge to edge of the sensor. So literally you can focus anywhere in the scene that you desire to focus on. You're not limited by a specific window that you have to focus within or 61 points. Literally the camera can focus effectively anywhere. And it gets even better because mirrorless camera technology can actually intelligently focus on and continuously track specific subjects. Within most mirrorless cameras, you can actually tell the camera if you want to focus on people, animals, even things like cars or trains, planes, any of that kind of stuff. The camera can intelligently look for those within the scene and then continuously focus on those. So literally all you have to do is click the shutter button and the person, the animal, the car, the object that you're trying to focus on is going to be in focus without you having to recompose your shot, tap the shutter button violently to keep the focus happening, or keep a very specific focus point over your subject constantly. It just takes so much work out of the autofocus part of actually taking your photo, allowing you to focus on composition, framing, exposure, all the things that really dial in your photo. And even crazier, most mirrorless cameras can also intentionally focus on the eye if you're focusing on people or animals, and it can actually track those eyes through the frame. And so if you have, for instance, a couple running at the camera's focusing system can literally pinpoint their eye, focus on that eye, and track that all the way through the frame, so that every photo you take is not only going to be focused, but it's going to be focused on the part of that person that you want to focus on, which is usually the eyes. So the focusing technology is just honestly mind-blowing, and one of the things that really sets mirrorless cameras apart from DSLRs. And one more really helpful feature of mirrorless cameras that's specifically helpful for people like myself who are in the wedding space and need to be discreet and quiet when you're shooting and not be a distraction to the event that's happening around you is the ability to turn off the mechanical shutter in the camera and specifically use the electronic shutter. So effectively in your camera, there are no moving parts that are going to be heard by anybody around you. This allows you to effectively completely silence your camera so you can be discreet, you can be quiet, you can fly under the radar and not cause a distraction by having your camera shutter be clicking, which is incredibly helpful if you're in an event like a wedding or a church, or even when you're traveling and just want to be a little bit more quiet. This is an incredibly cool and helpful feature to have. Now, there's a few common questions that I get from people and a lot of DMs that I've received that ask these specific questions, and so let's talk about a few of those questions. The major issue I hear from people, and the issue that I had when I was switching to mirrorless, is what about the electronic viewfinder? Is it weird to get used to shooting with an electronic viewfinder versus an optical viewfinder? And my answer is yes and no. It's definitely a different experience, but it's an experience that you get used to pretty quickly. Now, if you were to purchase a mirrorless camera 10 years ago, the electronic viewfinders in those cameras were definitely not as good as they are now. The resolution, the refresh rate of these viewfinders is actually really, really good, and it definitely feels a lot more like you're looking through the lens versus you're looking at a screen than it did, say, 10 years ago with a mirrorless camera. So honestly, it's something you are going to have to get used to. I won't lie about that. It's definitely a different experience, but the information that's at your fingertips, the ability to literally preview your photo before you ever take it, and all the focusing capabilities that you have right within that viewfinder and right within the camera absolutely make it a worthwhile investment over a DSLR. The next question I get a lot is, but what about the battery life? Don't mirrorless cameras drain the battery really quickly? And honestly, I think they used to, and especially some of the Sony cameras used to drain batteries very, very quickly, but batteries have gotten better, cameras have gotten better at using energy, and honestly, I wouldn't worry about that if I was interested in switching to a mirrorless camera in 2023. Another thing people ask frequently is, what about the lenses that I used on my DSLR? Are those lenses going to be compatible with my mirrorless camera? Well, most mirrorless camera manufacturers have changed the lens mount, and so your mirrorless camera uses a different type of lens than your DSLR did. They have also made adapters that will adapt your DSLR lenses to your mirrorless camera, and this is actually what I'm shooting on right now. I'm shooting on a lens that was built for my Canon DSLRs, and I've adapted that to use on my mirrorless camera. And so if you're worried about having to buy all new lenses, you don't have to buy new lenses. The lenses that you currently have are going to work just fine on your new mirrorless system, and honestly, your mirrorless system will kind of supercharge those lenses because you're going to have some incredible autofocus features, you're going to have some incredible tracking options, and the camera technology is just better, so it's going to utilize that lens even better than it did on your DSLR. So short answer, no, your lenses technically aren't compatible, but there are adapters that allow you to completely adapt your lens from your DSLR to your mirrorless. So no, you don't have to go out and buy a whole new range of glass. The lenses that you use right now are probably going to work just fine on your mirrorless camera. And then the last question I get a lot is, but what about my editing? Are my colors going to be different? Are my photos going to look different? And honestly, I'm going to say both yes and no. You're definitely not going to notice this massive tonal shift or color shift in your images if you shoot on a mirrorless camera versus a DSLR. Now, with any camera, there's going to be some differences. Sensors look different from camera to camera. Just like if you were to purchase a Canon 6D Mark II and then shoot with a Canon 5D Mark IV, the colors are going to look a little bit different. You're going to have to adjust and tweak your editing style between those two different cameras. That's going to be the exact same experience you have with a mirrorless camera. Just like with any camera purchase, you're going to have to adjust to how that camera handles tones and colors, but will it make a massive shift and completely change your editing style and your workflow and all that? Not really. It's just another camera, it's another tool, it's another piece of equipment that you're going to use to document and capture life. But Josh, what if I'm happy with the camera that I have? What if I'm happy with the work I'm creating? Do I need to switch to mirrorless? Absolutely, you do not.
Absolutely, I would not.
If you're happy with the work you're creating, if you're happy with the camera that you have, if the camera you have is able to accomplish the needs that you have as a creator, keep the camera you have. There's no rule that says you have to buy a mirrorless camera to create good photographs. Absolutely not. But if you're interested in upgrading your camera, if you want newer technology, if your camera dies and you need to get a new one, absolutely look at shifting over to a mirrorless camera, because this really is the future of digital photography. This is the future of cameras. And so if you're going to be upgrading, if you're going to be moving to a new camera, absolutely look at a mirrorless camera. But do you have to upgrade? Absolutely not. And then a few tips for those of you who decide to move from a DSLR to mirrorless. First off, don't expect to be blown away immediately. This is definitely going to be a transition. Give yourself time to adjust, give yourself time to learn the camera, and expect to be a little bit unsure about it for a little bit. Just like moving to any new piece of technology takes some time and takes some adjustment, give yourself the space, give yourself the time to get adjusted, and don't expect to just absolutely fall in love with it right away. To help aid in that process, get out and shoot everything. Take a ton of photos, take a ton of test shoots, get out with some friends who are willing to model with you, go shoot some scenery, go shoot some landscapes, put the camera through its paces, just like you would with any other camera you purchase, because you have to give yourself time as a creative to learn the system, figure that camera out, and to get comfortable shooting with it. Just like the camera you shoot with now, you probably didn't pick it up and were immediately as confident and comfortable with it as you are today. It took you some time, it took some repetition to get used to it. So don't expect to be blown away, and give yourself the time and the space to learn the camera, shoot a bunch of work with it, figure out how it works, and feel confident with it in your hands. And the third tip is invest in education. Take time to learn. And you don't have to go out and buy a course on mirrorless cameras or your camera specifically, although you can totally do that. But utilize resources like YouTube, even like this channel where I have gear walkthroughs and setup guides and all that. And ask people who've done this before you. Feel free to reach out to me directly, leave comments down below if you have questions, or DM me on Instagram. I'm happy to help you with this transition. I understand it's a little bit daunting. There's a little bit of uncertainty and fear that goes into all this, but I promise you it'll be worth it. These cameras are absolutely amazing. Ask questions, reach out, get education, get help when you need it. There's a lot of incredible resources out there that will help you learn the new mirrorless camera that you decide to purchase and become more confident and more comfortable with it, just like you were with your DSLR. So hopefully that's been a helpful look at the differences between DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those down below or DM me on Instagram and I would be more than happy to help you out. Thanks so much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.